Hi everyone, welcome along to Sutherland Library. Thank you for joining us all this evening on National Threatened Species Day, which shines a spotlight on all Australian native animals and plant species that are facing the threat of extinction. I'm just starting off tonight with an acknowledgement of country. Sutherland Shire Council acknowledges the Darawal people. Hi, welcome. Come and take a seat. Sutherland Shire Council acknowledges the Darawal people as the traditional custodians of the land within the Sutherland Shire. We value and celebrate Darawal culture and language and acknowledge Darawal people's continuing connection to the land, the sea and community. We pay respect to the elders and their families, past, present and emerging, and through them to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Just a little bit of information about the building tonight. The toilets are back around toward the front of the library, opposite the information desk. A staff member can help you if you can't track them down. In the event of an emergency evacuation, and I won't lie to you, we had one on Tuesday, just follow our directions. We'll lead you out the front of the library, and the emergency meeting room is Peace Park across the road, but we'll all stick together in the unlikely event that happens. I hope everyone has their mobile phones turned off or to silent so we don't have any interruptions. And we just ask any questions that you do have, save them till the end, and Eliza will of course be more than happy to answer them for you. Tonight's event is held in collaboration with Sutherland Shire Council's Sustainability team in the Environmental Science Unit. We at the libraries are passionate about creating sustainable communities and nurturing the natural environment that we are very, very lucky to have. And that's why we're happy tonight to be joined by Dr Eliza Middleton, who is the, I'm going to read this carefully because it's an impressive mouthful, Biodiversity Management Officer for the University of Sydney with a PhD in invertebrate behaviour and ecology. So we're in very good hands tonight. She'll be speaking tonight about threatened species in our urban environment, why biodiversity is so important and how we can play a role in this important issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and for the library for hosting me. I'm Eliza. I guess to start off with, it doesn't sound like a good way to open a story, but you know, we're currently deep in the midst of the 6th mass extinction event, and that extinction event is largely driven by the human behaviour over the last 400 years. Between 1970 and 2018, global wildlife populations fell by about 96%, and that's on average. And we extinct around 30,000 species each year. And we contribute to the extinction of 10,000 species, which is above what the normal background kind of extinction rate is. So in the next hour, 70 species will go extinct, gone forever. So tonight I want to talk about the role of our cities in protecting our threatened species. I'll be speaking about biodiversity generally and which of our threatened species are really the litmus test for how well we're doing in relation to climate change and addressing climate as well. So first I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and communities of the lands that I live and work on. I live here on Darawal country, but I'm from Barkindji country. Science began here on this continent. We can draw this amazing line from the birthplace of the first scientists and ecologists in our traditional people to today, and them solving the problems with engineering, with science, with ecology, back then to today. So we really have such a special place where we live. And I think the understanding of the needs of the environment, the balance to have healthy people in a healthy place is deeply embedded within that knowledge. And so that's something that, you know, I'm incredibly thankful for, and I really want more than ever to be listening to those conversations. I would also like to take a moment to reflect on my own path and acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the country that I come from, the Barkindji country. It was the curiosity and kindness of a young Barkindji man, Bruce Redman, that set me on the trajectory to where I am today. He took his time to share special things about the environment with me when I was a child, and that has shaped who I've become and what I'm trying to do. So please take a moment to reflect on the influence that First Nations people and First Nations communities have had on your paths. So I'm the Biodiversity Management Officer for the University of Sydney, which is all owned lands of the university. Australia's first university, Australia's oldest university. And as you can see here, we've got quite a big amount of land. We have quite a number of different sorts of environments. So we've got our 4 urban campuses, we've got our research stations, but we also have almost 12,000 hectares of farmland, and that farmland covers all diversity of farming. So we have a piggery, we have dairies, we have cropping, we have irrigation cropping, dryland cropping, grazing, and so the broad uses, their requirements, but also the management styles are very different between each of the farms. And on top of that, each of these locations are in different sorts of environments around New South Wales. So the pressures and threats to them are very different. But I see this, in my case, as an incredible opportunity to really showcase how we could be embracing these sustainable practices and how we can champion biodiversity action through the university and through the lands that we hold, and how we can really show people how you can address these problems and how you can balance urbanisation with the environment. You can balance agriculture with the environment. So I kind of see that as where my position at the university kind of stands. But if we step back a bit and I give you a bit more of an introduction to me, this is Barkindji country. I'm a real country girl. I grew up on the banks of the Barker, which is the Darling River, on a farm of sheep and cattle. And for those of you who might know where this is beyond the Bogan Shire. So you have to go through the Bogan Shire to get there, which I think means I might be more Bogan than Bogan, but that's me. Growing up here really connected me with the land and with the environment and how harsh it can be if you don't get it right. For the majority of my life, the area was drought declared, and yet we persisted with farming sheep and cattle. Looking back now, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and I guess that's really helped to create the foundation of my current work about regenerative agriculture and restorative agriculture, and understanding how we can work, together, not only to get what we need from our environment, but to give back to our environment to ensure that we can keep getting what we need. And what we need is a healthy symbiosis, and that extends to our cities. So fast forward, and I moved off the farm to the big smoke, because that's the big threat when you live on a farm, is everyone's going to go to the big smoke. And a few degrees later and various research positions around Australia, I'm now a local here in the Shire. Looking around the Shire, I see some incredible opportunities for us to really action, to be truly cohesive with our environment. And whilst there are ways in which we are failing to protect our environment and our threatened species, there are ways in which I think that the Shire is actually setting an example for many parts of Sydney.
I'm surprised.
I'll show you. But first, let's step back and I'll just explain what biodiversity is. So biodiversity is the variety and variability of life on Earth. So it's everything. And we measure that at 4 different levels. We measure that at the genetic level, the smallest level. You want great genetic diversity within a species so that they're resilient to changes. Then you want diversity within a species, within a habitat, and then at that ecosystem level. Threatened species are any plant or animal that are at risk of extinction. And just here is the IUCN's classification of how species get classified. So all species go in and then get split into whether they've been evaluated, whether they're eligible for assessment or not, whether there's just not enough data about them yet to make an assessment of their threat status. And then within that, you go from the least concern, things that we're not super worried about, all the way up through the 3 threatened categories to the regionally extinct, extinct in the wild, and then extinct forever. And the reason that this matters is because the threatened species, our threatened species, are really a sign of how well we're doing. They're a sign of how our ecosystem is slowly starting to fall apart. And each species that's lost triggers the loss of something else within the ecosystem. So the way that they interact, a lot of these interactions we don't even fully understand. And that brings me to this nice little graphic. So we have about 2 million described species, but the extinction risk for those have only been evaluated for about 5%. So of those 2 million species, we only know whether or not 5% of them are at risk of extinction. We don't know about the rest. And part of that is because we don't have enough data, or we just simply don't have the time to get the information that we need for that. There's an overwhelmingly large number of invertebrates that are yet to be discovered and described. So up the top here, you can see that the described and accepted species are in green. And then at the end of that bar in the column, it's got that white part of the bar. That's the estimated undiscovered species. So we do have a lot of invertebrates that we've found, but there's potentially a total of 7 million vertebrates. And how many we've described of that is tiny. And then when we look at our vertebrates, so the invertebrates are all of our insects, the vertebrates are our birds, our mammals, anything with a spine. You can see here that when it comes to mammals, we've pretty well covered it all. It's kind of, you go outside, can't help but trip over some kind of mammal. Same with birds, everybody loves a pretty bird. They flit around, they make noise, so they're really easy to find. Fish are the ones, and amphibians, that have a bit more of a way to go, especially the amphibians. And again, that's a bit of difficulty in terms of accessing them, but the overwhelmingly one is the invertebrates. And the risk there is that we're losing species before we know anything about them. So if we just have a dive into the state of biodiversity, it's pretty grim. So Australia is doing pretty bad. We have seen the most mammal declines of any country that's been able to record the loss of biodiversity. And we've had a decline in the last 200 years. It's the largest documented decline of any continent, has been in Australia. The biggest pressures, despite our best effort, habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, habitat degradation, but then there's also things with introduced species and with how we're interacting with the environment. And the reason that this is really important is climate change and nature are incredibly intertwined. You can't have one without the other. There's been a lot of discussion about climate change. I think people understand climate change now. They understand that carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, they're impacting the way that our environment can help itself, which is impacting our weather systems, it's impacting our fire loads, and it's having those kinds of impacts. But what we don't seem to be really grasping in this conversation or stressing in this conversation is that when we lose biodiversity, we make climate change worse because they're intertwined. They're two sides of the same coin. So in this nice little graphic that I quite like, when you lose biodiversity, you have reduced structural diversity of vegetation, and that impacts our soils. So less of our soil is conserved, we have greater soil erosion, which leads to a loss of nutrients and loss of soil moisture, which means more things can't survive there anymore, so we lose more species. That feeds directly into climate change in that soil erosion reduces our primary productivity and nutrient cycling, which leads to desertification, which is a problem that they think we are on track for in the Amazon, that in the next 100 years, the Amazon will go from a beautiful rainforest to a savanna, and that is a trajectory that once we're on it, we can't get out of it. And so then we have reduced carbon sequestration, we have an increase in those extreme events, we have an increase in the loss of more and more species because of these interactions. So it's a positive feedback cycle. It's negative in what it's doing, but it's a positive feedback cycle in that it'll keep feeding into itself. So if we're able to protect nature, we will actually address a third of our climate change problems. The other two areas of that equation are the transition to renewable energies and dealing with our urban environments, which have their own problems around urban heat island effect and things like that. If we have a look a bit closer at Australia, these are Australia's nationally threatened species. What I would really want to point out mostly here is that there's two different scales on this graph. There's one on the left that goes from 0 to 80, there's one on the right that goes from 0 to 700. The 0 to 700 is our plants. So we have a lot more plants that are critically endangered and vulnerable than we do of any of our other animals. The animals that are listed are very much biased towards our birds and our mammals, and there's not much. Invertebrates just get grouped under other animals, so we don't even have a distinct category for invertebrates. So of the listed species, 70% of them are plants, only 30% of them are animals. And yet when you think about our threatened species, you'll be thinking about koalas, you'll be thinking about greater gliders, you won't be thinking about, the snotty gobble or, any of these other beautiful plant species, which part of that is to do with what's called plant blindness. And that's because we don't pick them out because they don't pose a threat to us in terms of our evolutionary behaviours. You want to look for the dangerous thing that's hiding in the grass, not necessarily the grass that's just sitting there. The grass itself is also pretty green, pretty uniform, so it's a bit harder for us to engage with plants than it is for us to engage on that behavioural level with animals. But the really, I think, shocking thing about this for me is that a third of our threatened species, so a third of this pie graph, live in our cities. And I think a lot of people will find that really surprising. But one of the examples is on the corner of Oak Road and Princess Highway? President Avenue. And that's the turpentine ironbark forest. So this is a critically endangered ecological community. So an ecological community is the group of native plants, animals and other organisms that interact in a unique habitat. They're reliant on each other, they need each other, and they don't exist anywhere else. Their structure, composition, all of that is determined by their environmental factors like humidity, rainfall, and they are vital wildlife corridors and refuges, especially through this extremely fragmented habitat that we have in the cities that we've created. Giving them the name of a threatened ecological community gives them landscape and systems level protections. However, those of you who know about this particular corner, it still doesn't stop development. There's still always a way around to get things happening, even though this is a critically endangered ecological community, and if you remember from that list, the next step up is moving into extinction. When we look at the pressures on our threatened species, I don't think any of these will come as a surprise. Pollution is obviously a pressure, climate change is a pressure, invasive species and diseases are a big pressure, especially if we look at cats. So cats have been directly responsible for the extinction of 20 mammals in Australia. So they're the direct cause of the extinction of 20 of our mammals. And we'll never see those again. We also have species overexploitation and then changes in land and sea use, which is through our housing developments and our unsustainable agriculture.
Do we have orangutans, do we?
No. But the biggest threat, I think, to biodiversity, the biggest risk is actually our way of life. So these three little graphs of Australia, the orangey yellowy one shows you the density of people per square kilometre, and so the darker the colour is, the more people there are per square kilometre. And you can see, unsurprisingly, that's focused around our cities, focused around the eastern seaboard, moving a little bit into New South Wales and Queensland, but not too far because, the rest is desert. Then when we look at the one below it with the green and the grey, the green colours are where we have our grazing, our cropping, and you can see that overlaps pretty well our agricultural industry with kind of where our density is. And then if you look over at the biggest one with the browns and the blues, these are the different kinds of threats that are the predominant threat in each of these environments. And you can see overlapping with where we mostly live and where we mostly get our food is habitat loss and introduced species. They're the biggest risks. We also have a huge risk for introduced species, invasive species, right in the centre of Australia. But the other thing that I want to point out, and this goes back to my acknowledgement of country and our Indigenous people having knowledge that we really need to tap into, is that this is an overlay of where we protect. So what you can see in the purple that's overlaid on our threat distribution map, where the invasive species and the fire regimes, in the purple there, that's what we've decided to protect. So places we don't live, places we don't eat, places that are pretty much just desert. And additionally, these places are the places that we've given back to Indigenous owners. And these are the places that are managed by Indigenous people. So we're protecting things that we don't really need. But so what's the role of urban environments? We don't live out in the desert, we don't live out on the farms, we can't really do much there. In terms of urban environments, biodiversity is really crucial for our urban centres. Biodiversity provides us with a lot of ecosystem services, but there's also, I guess, some more, less tangible things like mental health. I think a lot of us might have appreciated that a bit more during COVID, and physical exercise, employment. But having these green spaces really well planned out in our cities actually increases our air quality. It reduces the temperature by reducing the urban heat island impact. It also reduces noise. So our cities are less noisy, which I'm pretty sure everybody's kind of on board with a less noisy city. And so there are these really essential systems and services that biodiversity is providing us and can provide us in our cities if we really start grabbing onto it. So let's have a look at how Kirrawee is kind of faring, seeing as that's where I live now. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you the threatened species that have been recorded within 1 kilometre of the station. So it's not a very big circle. This is just some, this is not all. So we have the grey-headed flying fox down here in the bottom left. Then we have the eastern pygmy possum. We've got a few birds. We've got a bunch of plants. We've got some bats. What you see in the red, where it says V, it means that it's vulnerable, listed with the Commonwealth Government. If it's a V in black, it's not listed with the Commonwealth Government, but it is listed as threatened by the New South Wales State Government. And what you might notice is that if something has a listing of, let's say, the E here in black means it's endangered in New South Wales, that's only considered vulnerable at the Commonwealth level. So there's a bit of a lag there because they're taking different measures of the species distributions and things like that, but it's pretty significant that we have so many threatened, and this is just a sampling of the threatened species that we have within 1 kilometre of Kirrawee Station. And so what are the sorts of things that we could be doing to support the threatened species in our environment? A lot of it is just around good planning, good green innovations, finding these ways to manage the two things, to manage our needs with the environment's needs, to manage transport, accessibility with what we can provide for the environment. So having that sustainable urban planning is a massive thing, and that's things like green roofs, it's having good public transport and cycleways to really support people being able to walk through their neighbourhood and get everything that they need in a walkable distance or a bikeable distance. It's also about really good water conservation and waste management. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the Share Waste app. So at my place, I don't have a compost. I can't think of the brain space that I need to manage a compost with 2 small children and a dog and a cat and a husband and a job. But the Share Waste app links me up with other people in the Shire who have a compost system and will take my scraps and do the composting for me. So I've linked up with a couple of people, and once a week or so, being vegan, we go there often because we've always got scraps, but take them over, Helen takes them, she makes compost. There's also using our nature strips to rewild them. So of our urban green spaces, 1/3 of it is nature strips, is just green lawn nature strips. And so there's a wasted opportunity that we have there of providing some kind of habitat, refuge, something that our animals and our plants can really benefit from.
Very wasted.
Exactly. And then we also need wildlife-friendly infrastructure. So there is this fantastic innovation of not only solar panels on top of bus stops, but pollinator highways, of having plants up there that pollinators, birds, bees, wasps are able to use to get around the city in little jumps. And it's the same kind of thing that if you only have an apartment but you've got a balcony, you can have your own little pollinator rest stop. You can have your own little rest stop that birds or other species might be able to come and take a break from when they're trying to get somewhere else. And then there's also citizen science. So there's plenty of citizen science programs that are out there. There's one at the moment about Christmas beetles that one of my colleagues at the university is running. And if you go into your garden and you're gardening and you pick up one of those little curly grubs, instead of squashing it, if you take it in to my colleague, they are taking them to grow them up to see what they actually turn into. Because one of the thoughts is maybe they're Christmas beetles and we're just squishing them all because we think they're some kind of pest. But what's the main challenges of urban wildlife conservation? And I mean, there's a lot. But this is just to give you a bit of an idea. So feral cats in the top right there, and even not feral cats, cats that you just let out and don't have them in at night especially, they kill 1.5 billion natives every single year in Australia. So they are one of the biggest threats to our native species. And just keeping your cats in, keeping your cats at home is one of the easiest things that you can do to help our environment. And there's a few cities that are starting with cat curfews and some others that are having complete bans of cats being able to go outdoors. They can go into like cat runs or something like that, have their own little cat version of an aviary. But they're a significant threat. And then we also have the continuation of development. We have growth of our cities. So obviously we need space for us to grow into with growing populations, with changing needs. We need to redevelop. But that usually means a lot of land clearing and a lot of taking out this precious space that our environment needs. And one of the other things is that there's something called the edge effect. The edge effect is, as it sounds like, where the edge of a habitat moves into a disrupted environment, and that's where you have a huge rate of colonisation by invasive species, by invasive weeds, and that's where you have reduced survivability of our native species. We also have down here with the kangaroos, if you've got kangaroos all over the road, you're having an increase in those negative interactions between people and wildlife, where you're having people have accidents or something like that, which just brings on a negative interaction with the environment and a negative interaction with how people want to manage kangaroos or something like that, wanting it to be, controlled so it's no longer a threat to me when I drive to work. Pollution is always a huge challenge for our wildlife conservation. It's hard enough to breathe as a human when we have the bushfires that come into the cities with all the smoke. It's pretty hard to do that as an animal as well. We have our super built up areas. I mean, this is even just residential. It's not skyscrapers, but we've lost old growth trees. We've lost habitat complexity. It's just manicured lawns. And manicured lawns essentially are deserts. There's not much going on there. There's a place for them in a complete environment, but entire shires, councils, local government areas of just lawns isn't doing anything good for the environment. And with no shade, which is what this top picture is to demonstrate, these houses, these streets are going to boil. In the coming years with the impacts of climate change, what you can see here in this top left picture is that the trees provide us, and the shelter that our plants can provide us with, is a huge change in the temperatures that we'll experience. So they provide incredible respite for us and will help us manage warming cities as we're moving forward. So I started mentioning that I think Sutherland Shire is doing some good things. One of the really good things that I was really impressed by, and this is coming from my position of working for the University of Sydney and what I'm trying to achieve at a university that is, meant to be leadership for good and leading by example, in Australia's first uni, Australia's oldest uni, seeing the Green Web program that has just come about from years of dedication through the environmental science team is really impressive. And the idea is to create these corridors to connect up significant areas of remnant vegetation across the Shire. And I think it's a fantastic idea. And what you can do is you can reach out to them. They'll come and give you a garden consultation. They came and gave me one. I'm not in the area where you get financial assistance to completely change your garden, but what they do have is, if you're in these light green areas, they're priority areas that they have of what is a remnant vegetation patch that maybe isn't exactly in the condition that it should be. But if you're in the yellow, then you are part of the program where they will come to your house, they will say, okay, this is what you can do, this is what the environment needs here, for you to be able to link up with other areas to create that corridor. They also have this fantastic website that they've created that I absolutely love, and it's where you go to find out which plants were in your environment before we colonised it and cleared it all out. And so if you want to go in and list all the native plants, and then think about, you want to look at some trees and some shrubs to have in your garden. Maybe you want some shade tolerant ones. Maybe you want some that are feature plants with really showy flowers. You can choose all of those, search the plants, and it will list for you all of the species in the Shire that were here or that are here that you can then plant. If you put your address in, it'll make it even more specific to your address about what species are around. One of the biggest challenges I guess I have in corporate land is, but what if we don't? What if we just don't do it? Because biodiversity is just a nice to have, right? We've got plenty of green trees, Eliza. We've got these beautiful green lawns. I think it's all fine. If we don't, I think we'll be seeing much more of these noisy miners for a start. And I don't think anybody has been super keen on those. They actually have an incredible history where reports from the 1800s, were writing about how they had a song that marvelled European songbirds, and, they really just made the environment so much nicer to be in. And then you progressively get to more and more modern things, and, there's a few expletives used when people complain about them on Reddit or something. But if we don't do anything, we really are deciding what remains with us. So all of these things that we don't really want around or like around, like these introduced species, cockroaches, rats, people, a lot of people don't like the ibis. I love the ibis, but a lot of people don't like the ibis. But the reason that they're around and you see them so much is because they're the things that can live with us. They're the things that can live in the environment we've created. And so moving forward, they're more of what we're going to see. We're not going to see more of our koalas or our swift parrots. If anything, it's entirely likely that those things will go extinct in the next 10, 20 years. We're also going to see an increase in extreme weather events. I'm pretty sure that the fires hit home for a lot of people about how dire the situation kind of is in terms of climate change, but that link to biodiversity was kind of missing there. And the same with our floods. The more that we create an environment where trees and plants and ecological communities can't persist and can't survive, the more erosion we have, the more runoff we have, the more instability we have when it comes to a flood. And that means that we're going to see a greater loss of life. We're going to see a continuing loss of species. We're going to see loss of infrastructure and loss of livelihood. And these kinds of things are really hard to deal with, hard to cope with. It's very easy to say, I think, but considering it's such a dire time right now, we've got the criminal invasion of the Ukraine, these are the important things we should be thinking about. The cost of living is so extreme, but biodiversity can't wait. These things are going to keep getting worse, which is going to make those impacts even more significant for us. We're also going to have less stable agricultural production. We're going to lose food security. We're going to lose water security. And that again is going to impact livelihoods. It's going to impact the choices that we make, what we're going to be able to make moving forward. And we're going to have increasingly less livable cities. So the more that we take these things out, the harder these cities are going to be to live in. But hope remains. Be hopeful. One of the biggest hopes is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So the task force, the TNFD, is based on the framework of the TCFD. The TCFD was the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and that led to recommendations and regulations around our reporting on climate risk on carbon emissions. So Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions, and that is slowly becoming legislated as things that people have to report on and have to comply with. So that's what happened with the climate-based task force. The nature-based task force is following the same track. They're releasing their recommendations on the 19th of September. And so I think in the next, 5-10 years, that is really going to be impacting business and it's going to be changing the way that people are doing business. And it's already happening with the fossil fuel industry and the finance industry already voluntarily reporting on their impacts on nature. So if they're already doing it and they're our really big industries, this is an area that's going to grow and going to change. And it's going to change how people invest, where people invest, choices that those kinds of levels of leadership and influence can do that, a mum in Kirrawee can't really decide who invests in the university. We also really need strong leadership. We need strong leadership from our federal government, from our state government, from our councils, from our businesses and institutions. And that's where I guess I feel like I'm stepping in. That's my role. So within the business of the University of Sydney, it's a research institute, it's a teaching institute, and then it's a business, all depending on what it wants to be at the time that you're talking to it. But it is a business, and so what I'm trying to do there is to make these things really apparent, make them undeniable, and that we have to do action on them, and we have to do significant action on them, and we have to be the leaders demonstrating how others can do it, because we are a research institution and we are an educational institution. So if we can't take the risks to research it and try it out to then teach it, how is a farmer going to do it, or how is a council going to figure out a way to do it? But if we can do it and we can demonstrate it, then I think that's really where our role is. So hopefully there's more people like me. But then there's also what we can do, and that's creating these backyard and balcony refuges for species. That's how we can, talk to and influence our neighbourhoods, our connections, our networks, to try and set up these, they might feel insignificant in the scheme of things, but they're not. Because maybe your place will be like my place, where a couple of years ago, we had a beautiful koala come and sit in the tree directly outside our front door. And hopefully he comes back, because hopefully I've created a garden and an environment that he wants to be in.
I think I saw him.
Probably.
Did wires go to that?
No.
Okay. Because I went to one that looked like that situation, I mean.
Yep. Anyway, that's it from me.
Thanks, Eliza. If anyone has any questions, pop your hand up and I'll give you the mic.
Oh, well, probably don't need it.
It's so that people at home can hear you.
You know Spanish moss? Do you know Spanish moss? That horrible stuff that takes over? Sorry, I've spoken to a number of councils and they are putting me off. It's declared a weed in Lord Howe Island, but here, oh no, it's okay. And it's just, I've seen it on nature strips taking up. I've seen it in where I live in a complex. It's just taken up a whole huge tree. It just spirals out of control and even falls down and takes over the shrubs. The weather and birds will transfer it very easily, but it's just so vibrant, and yet the councils are shrugging their shoulders. They just don't care.
Yeah, I think this just speaks to how difficult it is to invest and put action into things that it's declared a pest on Lord Howe Island.
Good for them.
Yeah, but it's not declared a weed of national significance. Oh, is it?
Oh, I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, no,
I've
but
never
it.
seen anything so
Yeah.
bad.
So it is, but
It's really
because it's not listed, it's hard to get the justification, to get the money and the investment into managing it. And this is the problem with the threatened species list as well, is that it's hard to convince people to put the effort in until you can go, well, actually, yeah, they're all dead now. So maybe
Exactly,
they're
it's too
extinct.
late.
Oh. So, and it's the same thing with our pest species, with the weeds. So asparagus vine is the same, asparagus fern, the same problem. It's everywhere. It is a weed of national significance, but there's areas all throughout the Shire where I see it.
I know,
And it's so hard to manage.
In regard to that, because it's just so bad.
Yeah,
You know, they can't do anything. It's got to that point, but it should not get to that point
yeah,
in the first place.
yeah.
It's hideous.
It's difficult. It's a very difficult.
And that's how it happens, so that's one of the root causes.
Yeah.
And also people's apathy. They don't care, you know?
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Eliza, thanks very much for your presentation. Just wondering, the university, you spoke about your role in kind of showing the way, I guess, and you probably can't speak for council, but to my knowledge, there's not a lot around that shows how Joe Norm can go from A to B or C to Z in becoming sustainable. Apart from composting and driving a Tesla, there's a fair bit in between, I imagine. Is there anything that you know of that guides people through becoming more sustainable somehow?
Yeah, so I know. So I sit within the sustainability team at the University of Sydney, and what we're rolling out at the moment, we have trialled it internally with staff, and our next step is to trial it with the student cohort and then to move it to a public platform. But it's called carbon literacy training. If you Google it, you can find that there's a few other places that it's taught at UQ, but it's also taught over in Europe. But they don't have an online version, they only do in person, which is why we've taken it on. But the idea of that one is to help people understand the impacts on the environment and what they can change, what is within their controls to change, because it is very hard and overwhelming. I can't afford a Tesla.
It feels like everyone sort of wants to do something, but it's unclear what to do exactly.
Exactly, and I feel that there is a bit of a passing the buck from governments and businesses into it's the individual. It's you just need to stop buying single-use plastics. It's like, or you could change legislation and requirements so that manufacturers can't make things covered in single-use plastics. So
on the list, take some action on that part.
yeah. And this speaks to this happened with Exxon. So in the 70s, when, they were digging up oil, as you do. They had some fantastic climate scientists do some modelling of the environment and of the climate to figure out what would happen if we continued business as usual over the next 100 years. And they found in the 70s, they modelled exactly the trajectory we're on, exactly the warming we have, exactly the amount of carbon we have in the atmosphere, perfectly. And that then just got hidden away. And the narrative changed from them being responsible actors to us needing to be responsible consumers. So it's, yeah. But it is a hard one. But the carbon literacy, and it's, engaging in citizen science and it's a lot of work to try and figure it all out. Yeah. It's hard. Yep.
Hi, we've got a question from someone at home. Sorry, just take that off. Do you know what would be required to have Sutherland Council ban cats outdoors?
Oh, I don't know what would be required, but that would be a hard one, and I would be interested in it happening. But yeah, I don't know what's required for that one.
Your local councillors,
Yeah.
get them in the know about it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any more questions?
Can I ask why you think Can I ask you why you think the council's so good? Because I certainly don't.
I think it's because being on the side of things that I am in terms of what's happening, within the university that I work for, as well as other universities that I've visited to see what they're doing, and then other councils to see what they're doing. Like something like the Green Web program I found really impressive and really actually listening to what the environment needs, which is those corridors for animals and those corridors for the movement of plants. That's something, that's a level of thought and understanding of the environment that I haven't quite seen done as well as that elsewhere. And then the support that they have for people who want to be a part of that program has been phenomenal. So that's part of it. Yeah, and having that native plant selector, I just found that really great, because I was like, oh, what should I plant? I don't know what to plant here. Oh, hey, this thing can help exactly figure it out for me. So, yeah.
Good to hear. Thank you.
I mean, there's plenty of other things that I'm like, well, actually, but yeah.
Any other questions? Big or small? Change the world? All right, well, I guess we'll leave it there then. Can everyone give a big round of applause to Eliza? That was a great talk, a real shot of truth, and I'm going to say that raising the issue of having a little pollinator rest stop area on my balcony is something I'm going to talk about as soon as I get home tonight. So that's what I'm going to take away. One other small thing that you can think about doing is here at Sutherland Shire Libraries we have what are called sustainability kits that you can borrow. You can borrow it with your membership, and it's a kit that you can take home, take back to your home, and essentially use the tools in the kit to do an energy audit on your home. So you can pinpoint ways that there might be energy waste, there might be gaps in your heating or your cooling, or your appliances are not as efficient as you could be. You can measure all of those things and work out ways to cut down on energy waste, save money, and also go a little bit of a ways towards the overall kind of big picture. So you can find information about the sustainability kits on our website, or just ask me after this and I'm happy to talk about it more with you. We also, as a library, we do loads of events year round, really interesting informational events, lots of free events. The best way to hear about those is to just subscribe to our What's On e-newsletter. Just sign up with your email, and once a month we send you a nice, bright, colourful email telling you all about what's coming up and big links to get you all booked in. So I won't take up any more of your time. Once again, thank you so much. That was fantastic, and I hope everyone has a good evening. Thanks.